الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Qasim is by the tents. He's asking if he can fight. Qasim is by the tents. He's asking if he can fight. The final sight of his Hassan is in front of Hussein. Qasim's telling his uncle, Ammu, my heart also burns. Akbar had shown his strength. When will it be my turn? I want to show the enemy I too am from Ali. The final sight of his Hassan is in front of Hussein. Hussein is seeking armor for this young warrior, but nothing fits his body. Qasim's still just 13. He's mounting on the horse. His feet don't even reach the final sight of his Hassan is in front of Hussein. Qasim is on the battlefield fighting the enemy. His face is shining bright. His fight is like Ali's. If I'm with my Imam, dying is like honey. The final sight of his Hassan is in front of Hussein. Fighting the enemy, Qasim is struck a blow. Uncle, come to my aid. His shout is ringing out. Hussein is charging in, rushing to get to him. The final sight of his brother is in front of Hussein. Qasim falls from his horse. Hussein is rushing to him. The enemy is running, but Qasim is on the ground. Horses trample his body, screaming he's underneath. The final sight of his brother is in front of Hussein. Hussein reaches his Qasim, his nephew he'd called for help. Qasim is writhing in pain, his body in agony. Qasim, forgive your uncle, he couldn't come to your aid. The final sight of his brother is in front of Hussein. trying to bring his body. He's holding him to his chest. Qasim just earlier had not fit upon his horse, but now Qasim is much taller. His feet drag on the sands. The final sight of his brother is in front of Hussein. After Qasim departs, they all leave their Imam. One by one they all go. Hussein is all alone. Shimmer sits on his chest. He's striking at his neck. The final sight of her Hussein, Zainab's watching in pain. Qasim, but rest assured, Hussein will face the same. He'll be trampled by horses, but his eyes stay on the tent. He's watching his Sakina. He knows what is to come. The final sight of his mother is in front of Hussein. And Akbar was his Muhammad, Qasim to him Hassan. Abbas was like Ali, his daughter like his mother. In this land how Hussein loses everyone again. And the final sight of this Hussein, Zainab carries the pain. Qasim is by the tent. He's asking if he can fight. The final sight of his Hassan is in front of Hussein. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
Jazakallah for that beautiful recitation. If I could ask everybody to please move forward as much as you can so that we don't disturb the majalis and make it convenient for those that come a little bit later. With the loud salawat, if you could please scoot up as much as you can. Thank you. For Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. And with that, I'd like to invite Sayyid Bilal Rizvi to take the pulpit. Please join me in inviting him with a loud salawat. Allah.
رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والسولة الحيدرية والإسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الردوية والجود التقوية والنقاوة النكوية والهيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يعوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم. لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي ومن يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. الله ولي الذين آمنوا يخرجهم من الظلمات إلى النور والذين كفروا أولياؤهم الطاغوت يخرجونهم من النور إلى الظلمات أولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatima Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. To give our condolences to the Imam of our time as we approach the day of Ashura, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. As we continue our series where we examine Ayatul Kursi, the next concept of analysis is a profound concept which is not only within the religion of Islam but across all of the major traditions in the world. And that is the concept of nur or light. When you look within this verse in the expanded sense and you go to chapter 2 verse 257, it says, Allahu waliyul ladina amanu yukhrijuhum min ad-dhulumati ila an-nur. That Allah is the guardian of the believers. He brings them out from the darkness into the light. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَوْلِيَاؤُهُمُ الطَّاغُوتِ يُخْرِجُونَهُم مِّنَ النُّورِ إِلَى الظُّلُمَاتِ. And those who are disbelievers, their guardians are those who transgress, and those transgressors take them from the light into the darkness. You see, the concept of nur or light is not just a concept which has been mentioned in the Quran and the narrations, but even in our everyday vocabulary as believers, we often use this terminology. How many times do you hear someone say that person has nur or light upon his face? Or you'll say that his speech has nur or light within it. But the question is that when the Quran is using this metaphor of nur and light, what is this metaphor signifying? And what can we learn from this? You see, when Allah in this verse, He says that He is the guardian of the believers, and He takes them from darkness into the light, you find that there are many different metaphors that the Quran uses for the spiritual journey of a human being. And this concept of darkness and light is using a different phrase for that journey. In other words, nur and light is nothing other than the soul being purified. And the more nur and light a person has, the more pure he is. And the more he is entrenched in darkness and dhulumat, you find the more impure that person is. Now over here, the verse when it begins, it says Allah is the guardian of the believers. Now in reality, Allah is the protector and the guardian of all of His creation. But why then does this verse it say that He is only the protector and the caretaker of those who believe? You know, the reality is this, is that those who turn their hearts towards Allah, there is a special form of guidance which is within their life, a form of guidance which can be called nur and light. But then those individuals who don't do this, they turn away. You find the Quran shows in reality their leaders are those who rebel and they are going from the light into darkness. You know, one such example in the Quran of a personality is the example of Qarun or Korah. This individual who's mentioned in chapter 28 verse 76. It says, Inna Qaruna kana min qawmi Musa. The verse says that amongst the people of Musa, there was an individual by the name of Qarun. وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْكُنُوزِ مَا إِنَّ مَفَاتِحَهُ لَتَنُوبُ بِالْعُصْبَةِ أُولِي الْقُوَّةِ. Allah over here says that we have given Qarun so much wealth that if a group of strong individuals tried to pick up the keys to his treasure, they wouldn't be able to pick it up. That Allah is giving such an analogy that you can imagine the immense amount of wealth that He has, that Allah uses such an analogy that if a group of strong men only tried to pick up that key, they wouldn't be able to pick it up. But you find the Quran, it shows this individual, instead of having that wealth and turning himself towards Allah in his affairs, the Quran shows the reply of this individual. And it says, قَالَ إِنَّمَا أُعْتِيتُهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ عِنْدِي. He says, the only reason I have been given this is not because of Allah, but because of the knowledge that I have. So over here, the Quran, it shows, yes, at one level, there is this journey from darkness into light. But those individuals who become in a state where they think they are self-sufficient, that they do not need Allah, in reality, Allah is not their guardian. You find the Quran, it then says, أَوْلِيَاؤُهُمُ الطَّاغُوتِ, that those who rebel, those false idols are their guardians. Over here, in reality, these rebels, these oppressors, these transgressors, these false idols, whatever word you want to use, they can't protect themselves, much less anyone else. But the reason the Quran says this is because these individuals have put their hopes in the means of this world instead of putting their hopes in Allah. So you find the first point about this ayat is that this journey from darkness to light is a journey about one's reliance upon God, one's spirituality, and one turning towards Him. So you find this is the first insight into the word nur. Now the second interesting thing that you see about what this concept of light is that when you look at the verse, it says mina dolomati ila nur. The word dhulumat is in the plural. In other words, it says darkness in the plural, but when it says the word nur, it uses the word nur in the singular. In other words, Allah should have done min ad-dhulumati ila al-anwar, that from darkness into light, both of the words should have been plural. But over here, Allah is showing that the path of darkness can have many forms. But you find that the path of guidance is only one light. It is only one path. It is one sirat al-mustaqim towards Allah. You know, the example is this. If you want to get to a destination and you're trying to get from point A to B, there is one direction to reach that destination. Now, within it, the routes, they may differ, but to reach your destination, there's one direction. But if you want to go away from your destination, it's not just one option. You have a million options if you're trying to go away.
in this reality, Allah is showing that when it comes to my light and my guidance, there is one path towards me. But when it comes to your misguidance, darkness is in the plural. There are many different paths. That's why when you look throughout history, those who are the awliya of Allah, the prophets, the imams, there is no conflict amongst the chosen of Allah. But conflict is often seen amongst those who are tyrants and oppressors. That when, for example, the caravan of Ahlul Bayt, it goes to Sham, what does Yazid say when the public opinion turns against him? At that moment, Yazid, he says that I didn't do this. Ibn Ziyad is the one who ordered the killing of Hussein. You find what this goes to show is that while the face of those who represent Yazid changes in every single time period, and it may change in its form, the face of the one who was Hussein remains the same in every time period. That's why you find the narration, it says, Awwaluna Muhammad, Akhiruna Muhammad, Awsatuna Muhammad, Kulluna Muhammad. That when it comes to us, all of our reality is the same. So you find at the second level, the second thing that we see about the concept of light from this ayat is that light is showing one path, and it's in the singular. But now the third point, which is a point of interest, is that when you look at this verse, when it describes the believers, correct? It says that they are going mina nuri ila dhulumat. That they are going, the believers are going from mina dhulumat ila nur. That they are going from darkness to the light. But the non-believers, awliya'uhum at-taghut, yukhrijunahum min an-nuri ila ad-dhulumat. That when it comes to the disbelievers, they are going from light to darkness. Now, doesn't this imply that the disbeliever is in a better position at the beginning of his journey? When Allah in this ayat says the believers, He says they are starting from darkness, they're going to light. But when He says the disbelievers, they're starting from light, they're going to darkness. The answer is that when the word is darkness and light, it's a relative word. In other words, if I'm in this room, there's light. The moment I leave and it's the middle of the day and it's sun, even though there is light here, there is light there, there is no comparison between this light and the light of the sun. In that manner, I am moving from darkness to light. So what this verse is demonstrating is about the progression and the journey. However, when Allah creates, you find the same level of light is given to all of His creation. You know, the Quran, it says, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةُ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. That, O mankind, turn your face towards your inner nature. That inner nature which God has created you upon. This goal in life is not some sort of external journey. What it shows is that it's an internal journey. That's why many of the wordings of the A'immah, when people would ask them about concepts, you find that the Imams would encourage them to reflect within themselves. For example, one man, he comes to Imam as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. And he says that, Ya Imam, dallani ala Allah ma huwa. That guide me to Allah. What is Allah? The Imam says, O man, hal rakibta safinata qat? That have you ever been upon a ship? And the man says, yes, I've been on a ship. And the Imam says that when you were on a ship, has there ever been a moment where your ship has tipped over, when it is capsized? You find the man replies, yes, such a moment has come. The Imam says, when you were in the ocean at that time, was your heart hopeless or did it have hope even then? The man says, yes, my heart had hope. The Imam says, that hope in your heart, that hope is Allah. In other words, the Imam encouraged him to this inner reflection, that this light of Allah is within the creation. Yes, through our journey it darkens. Yes, through this journey it becomes dim. But you find at that level, God created us with that light. So over here you find these ideas of nur are mentioned within this verse. But there's a very interesting and controversial question that we see within this ayat and a number of verses of the Quran which I want to examine in light of this discussion. You know, when you look at the Quran, correct, there's a number of verses of the Quran which speak about Allah guiding mankind and Allah guiding the believers. These set of verses, they make sense to us. But there's also a number of verses that say Allah misguides mankind. You know, for example, there's one verse, if you go to Surah Al-An'am, chapter 6, 125, verse number 125, it says, فَمَنْ يُرِدُ اللَّهُ أَنْ يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ. That when Allah wants to guide a person, He expands the breast of that person to Islam. In other words, He increases his capacity to accept the truth. But then it says, وَمَنْ يُرِدْ أَنْ يُضِلَّهُ يَجْعَلْ صَدْرَهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا. But when Allah wants to misguide someone, you find that He constricts the breast of that individual. Now over here, this idea of Allah misguiding people is mentioned not only in this verse, but dozens of verses in the Quran. You know, another example, Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 88. It says, أَتُرِيدُونَ أَن تَهْدُوا مَن يُضِلِّ اللَّهِ مَنْ أَضَلَّ اللَّهِ. That do you want to guide the one whom Allah has misguided? And then it says, وَمَن يُضْلِلِ اللَّهِ فَلَن تَجِدَ لَهُ سَبِيلًا. Whoever that Allah has misguided, there is no path for that person. Now, when the Quran says that Allah misguides mankind, there are a number of problems with this idea. The first idea is this, is that we in our religion say that Allah is a God of mercy. Does it make sense that if Allah is Rahman, He Himself misguides us and then He sends us to the fire of hell? That on the day of judgment, shouldn't we be able to turn to Allah if these verses are taken at face value and say, oh Allah, at the end of the day, my guidance and my misguidance was your doing. So if I went on the wrong path, then what should I do? You know, even in our communities, many of us use this terminology where we think that this idea is 100% just God. For example, if somebody is going down the wrong path, you'll say that may God guide him. Or we can't do anything in this situation, only God can guide him. So you find this is the first problem. The second problem, which these verses on the outward they present, is that how many times in the Quran does Allah condemn somebody who misguides? But then the Quran is saying Allah Himself misguides. For example, one verse of the Quran it says, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنِ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا لِيُضِلَّ النَّاسَ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. That who is a bigger oppressor than the one who ascribes lies to Allah in order to misguide the people? This is a clear condemnation of the Quran of somebody who misguides. Further than that, Shaitan was an outcast. And Shaitan, he says, لَأُغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. That I'll misguide all of them. I will lead all of them astray. You find Shaitan is condemned in the Quran. So all of these different verses, on one hand, are talking about condemning those who misguide, but then we have a verse that says, يُضِلُّ مَن يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. That Allah guides who He wants and He misguides who He wants. And at the third level, you find the third issue with this is that how much care does Allah take for our guidance? That He gives us the religion. He gives us a prophet. That prophet has successors. He leaves the miracle of the Quran. All of these things are for our guidance. And I'll examine this discussion about guidance and misguidance in the following manners. Number one, we'll examine what does the Quran say are the types of guidance in the life of a human being. At the second level, we'll examine that what is the relationship between misguidance and guidance. At the third level, we'll answer this question as to what does it mean for Allah to misguide. Number 4, we'll answer the question of how we can increase our guidance within these majalis of Imam al-Hussein. And at the 5th level, we'll examine the tradition which says that when Allah desires good for a person, He guides that individual to the love of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Now, when it comes to this discussion, if we are going to understand the concept of guidance, which is associated with light, when you look in the Quran uses the word light for it to mean a number of different things and a number of different entities in God's system. For example, one verse, chapter 24, verse 35, it says, Allahu nura samawati wal ard, that Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. A second portion of this verse, it'll say that the system of God is nurun ala nur, light upon light. A third portion of this verse will say, Yahdallahu li nurihi man yasha. That which Allah is guiding you to is light and nur. In other words, guidance is light and misguidance is darkness. So the question is, what are the types of light and guidance coming in towards our life? At the first level, as I mentioned, there is a type of guidance Allah gives all of His creation. And this type of guidance is by the fact that we are born. He has created within us the recognition of truth at some capacity. In this regard, the Quran says, قال ربنا الذي خلق كل قال ربنا الذي أعطى كل شيء خلق ثم هدى. That Allah created everything. He gave everything its form and then He guided it. The Quran over here is showing the first type of guidance within your life is that the moment you are born with guidance within you. So you find this is the first level of guidance. The second level of guidance that God gives within our life is that He guides us to the religion through His emissaries. For example, the verse that says, chapter 32, verse 24, وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا. That it uses the word hidayah, and it says we have made imams and leaders who guide by our command. You find that this is the second form. But then we come to the third form. And this third form of guidance allows us to understand the concept of nur, and it gives us an insight into God's system. You know what the third form of guidance is? The third form of guidance is what you and I call tawfiq. The word tawfiq, or divine grace or opportunity, is what? When you look in the Quran, there's a number of the verses of the Quran that say that Allah's mercy is such that, O mankind, when you walk upon the path of God, God will facilitate things for you. One verse it says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. That those who struggle within our ways, we will guide that individual towards our path. There's one hadith al-Qudsi, if you want to understand the rahmah of Allah. One hadith al-Qudsi, it says, مَنْ تَقَرَّبَ إِلَيْهِ شِبْرٌ تَقَرَّبْتُ إِلَيْهِ ذِرَاءً. That the one who comes closer to me by the hand of a span, the one who comes close to me and he comes towards me this much, I come towards him the length of an entire arm. Meaning, you take one step towards him, Allah will take 10 steps towards you, as the narration is saying. When you look at those individuals, there were individuals on the day of Ashura that all they needed was one step. And when that one step it was given, you find that Imam al-Hussein took them in a manner that those same individuals who would be condemned, we say alayhi salam and we send our peace upon them after we take their name. One of those personalities is Zuhair ibn al-Qayn. Zuhair was not in the army of Imam al-Hussein initially. He wasn't in the caravan of Imam al-Hussein. And it stated that Zuhair even had a level of animosity towards Imam al-Hussein. As they're leaving from Mecca towards Karbala, Zuhair and Imam al-Hussein are traveling at the same time. And it stated that Zuhair, at every halting station, because there would be common stops, he would purposely avoid Imam al-Hussein. But at one of those places, Imam al-Hussein sends one of his servants to Zuhair. And he says that Hussein is calling you. You know, Zuhair didn't want to go. But the wife of Zuhair says, who is that? And he replies by saying that Hussein has invited me. The wife of Zuhair says that the grandson of Rasulullah is calling you and you're not going. In other words, sometimes people need one push. And one push is enough to change their destiny and the outcome of their life. This Zuhair, he goes. History doesn't record what the Imam says to Zuhair. But what we know is that when Zuhair comes out, he says to his wife, you can leave. He says to his servant, you can leave, I am going with Hussein. You know, this is the same Zuhair that he wasn't with Imam al-Hussein. But Imam al-Hussein, in his final moments, when there was no one there for Abu Abdullah, it stated he took the names of 3 people, one of them was Zuhair. The first person whose name he took is that he says, Ya Habib ibn Madahir. The one who was his childhood friend. Ya Muslim ibn Awsajaw, the one who was an elder from amongst his companions. But the third name he says is Ya Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, Mali unadikum fala tujibun. Why is it that I call you and you don't reply to me? You see, this is Zuhair. When over here Allah is speaking about His guidance and His tawfiq, sometimes when a person takes one step, Allah raises his status in a manner which is unimaginable. You know, there's another verse of the Quran that shows this idea. It says, يُطَبِّتُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ. That those who already believe, Allah fortifies them. He makes them steady-footed. He makes them firm because of that belief. In other words, the first step is bring belief. And the second step is Allah will make your feet steady because of that belief that you have within you. So we find that the third form of guidance, as per the traditions, is that when somebody is upon the path, يَهْدِيهِمْ رَبُّهُمْ بِإِمَانِهِمْ, as one verse says, that because they struggled to gain faith, Allah guides them even farther within that faith. And then the fourth form of guidance is that when the believers are guided into paradise, the Quran says that they'll state, Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana li hada wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. That the believers will say that Allah has guided us to paradise. But now over here we come to the crux of the question. That if we have examined what is guidance, and we have examined what is light and nur, which is guidance, the question is, what is misguidance and the relationship of misguidance to guidance? You know, I mentioned on another night that evil, as from one perspective, doesn't have an existence. That evil is the absence of good. Poverty is the absence of wealth. You find over here, misguidance is the absence of guidance. You know, when you have darkness, darkness is what? It's the absence of light. You know, all you have to do to make the room dark is you turn the light off. You don't have to turn a darkness switch on. So you find over here, this is the reality of that situation. So misguidance doesn't have a reality. Now the question is when we say, as per these verses, that Allah misguides mankind, what does this mean? The first point in regards to this answer is that everything is in the domain of Allah. When these verses are saying Allah misguides, Allah has created man with the capacity of good and He has created man with the capacity of evil. Everything is within the domain of Allah. So you find it's an allusion to the qudra and the power of Allah. The second point in this regard is that Allah will never misguide somebody unless they themselves go on the path of misguidance. And this is the key take-home point. When you look at the verses of the Quran, there are a number of the verses of the Quran that say that Allah will only misguide after a person himself has struggled in the path of misguidance. For example, Surah Al-Baqarah chapter 2 verse 10, it says, فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ, that these individuals had a disease within their heart, فَزَادَهُمُ اللَّهُ مَرَضًا. And only after they had that disease within their heart, Allah increased that disease. Another verse of the Quran, it says, لَمَّا زَاغُوا أَزَاغُ اللَّهُ قُلُوبَهُمْ, that the moment they went astray, only then Allah made them go astray farther. In other words, it is not of the mercy of Allah to misguide a believer, somebody who has the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt, somebody who has Iman, that's your own doing. But Allah will only misguide that person who has tried, who has given up, only then misguidance will come. But you find Allama Tabatabai says even this isn't a correct answer. They said to him, what do you mean this isn't a correct answer? They said that this isn't according to the mercy of Allah. He says Allah would never send a human being into a downward spiral. So they said, what do you mean? What is the understanding of this verse then? He says the understanding of this verse is that the believers have a special guidance from Allah. And all Allah has to do is that He removes that special guidance, and you find those individuals, they go down the wrong path. It's not that Allah is misguiding per se. It is not that Allah is sending them down that spiral. You know, there's many individuals that initially they had faith, but that tawfiq was taken away because of their actions. You know, one example of such is Zubayr. You know, Zubayr was one of the most loyal confidants of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The mother of Zuhair and Abu Talib were brother and sister. That makes Zubayr the first cousin of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And it's mentioned in one narration that on the day of Jamal, Amir al-Mu'mineen says to Zubayr, "O Zubayr, do you remember that time Rasulullah looked at us? And he said to you, Atuhibbu Aliyan, that Zubayr, do you love Ali? And you replied by saying that Ali is my cousin and Ali is praised by you. I love Ali." And Rasulullah said, "O Zubayr, a day will come when you oppose this Ali ibn Abi Talib." You know, after the door of Fatima to Zahra was burnt, and after the event of Saqifa, Zubayr came to Amir al-Mu'mineen and he says, "Ya Ali, why don't you fight for your right?" The Imam says, "If I had 40 individuals, I would fight." Zubayr says, "We have 40. We're ready." The Imam says, "All right, if you're ready, shave your head and come to my house tomorrow." You know, shaving your head in the language of the Arabs meant that I'm ready to die. That this is it, I'm ready to give my life. You know, 4 individuals out of that group came to the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The first was Salman. The second was Abu Dhar. The third was Miqdad. The fourth was Zubayr. You know how many years are in between Jamal and the day of Saqifa? Roughly 25 years. That what happened to a man that in 25 years he went from such utter loyalty that he was willing to give his life for Amir al-Mu'mineen to where he comes to a point where he's raising a sword against Ali ibn Abi Talib. You find that a human being, even if in one moment he is on the path of faith, that can be taken away from him. That's why struggle in life. That's why one asks for guidance at every moment. That as long as Allah is guiding as per the verses of the Quran, as long as Noor is there as per the verses of the Quran, you find that individual is upon that path. The moment Noor is taken away, you find darkness comes into the heart of that individual. You know, when Allah desires light and guidance for a person, it's not just that he stays upon the religion, but you find every aspect of his life is impacted. You know, there's a narration where a companion by the name of Unwan al-Basri, he goes to Imam al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. And when he goes to the Imam and he says, "Oh Imam, teach me from your knowledge," the Imam says, "Laysa al-ilmu bita'allum." He says that knowledge isn't gained by learning. That knowledge, if you want ilm is something much more than learning. He says, "Innama huwa nurun yaqa'u fi qalbi man yuridu Allahu tabarak wa ta'ala in yahdiyah." That in this narration, the Imam says that knowledge is a light which Allah places in the hearts of the one whom He wants to guide. In other words, there is a connection between nur and guidance over here once again. So you find that ilm is a byproduct of that guidance, a byproduct of that effort and that tawfiq. And another of those byproducts, as per the narration, is that Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, he says, "Man aradallahu bihil khayra qadafa fi qalbihi hubba al-Husayn wa hubba ziyaratih." That when Allah wants to guide somebody, when Allah wants to put nur in the hearts of somebody and He desires good for that person, the first thing Allah does is He puts the love of Hussein in the heart of that person. And the second thing which Allah does is He places the love of the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. You know, if we have the love of Imam al-Hussein and we have the desire for ziyarah, then truly we should thank Allah for that reality. Because over here, this is a special form of guidance. It is a special form of nur, as the narration it alludes to. And you find that this reality is seen within our lives. You see, when you look at the companions of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they are those individuals who understood what guidance is. And one blessing they had is that the Imam himself was nur. You know, when you read Ziyarat Jamiat al-Kabira, over there we say, "Assalamu alaykum," that peace be upon you, "Antumun nur as-sati," that all of you are that illuminating light of Allah. That every moment they would give guidance, and every moment they would show the reality. And one of those moments was the night before Ashura, that the Imam, he would give an insight, he would shed light upon who would be martyred on the day of Ashura. You know, as the Imam was mentioning all of those different people who would be martyred, it stated that there was one young man who would wait for his name to be called. The name of Abbas would be called, that young man would wait. The name of On and Muhammad would be called, that young man, he would wait. It came to a point when even the name of Ali Asghar was stated. That young individual was none other than Qasim, the son of Imam al-Hasan. That as all of these names were being called, a point it comes where he goes to his uncle and he says, "Oh my uncle, that am I not going to be one of the martyrs? You mentioned the name of everyone, but you haven't mentioned my name." At that point, the Imam, he says his famous line, he says, "Ya Qasim, kayf al-maut indak?" That how do you find death? Qasim at that point, he replies by saying, "Ahla min al-asal." That death to me is sweeter than honey. You know, if somebody has a brother who's passed away, that which remains of their brother is something which is dear to them. You know, Imam al-Hasan is the one that Imam al-Hussein, Allam al-Majlisi says that when Imam al-Hussein was by the grave of Imam al-Hasan, he said some lines of poetry. And in those lines of poetry, he said that a lost person is not a person who has lost wealth, but a lost person is one who has lost a brother like Hassan al-Mujtaba. You know, when Imam al-Hassan was in his final moments, a point it came when Imam al-Hassan would begin to vomit pieces of his liver. And when he began to vomit those pieces, he would say, "Oh Hussein, cover these pieces." The Imam would say, "Why?" He would say, "I don't want Zainab and Kulthum to see this. But I say, oh Imam al-Hassan, come to Karbala. What did Zainab see on the day of Ashura? That Zainab would watch was Shimar Jalisun ala Sadr al-Hussein." Imam al-Hussein would begin to cry at the body of his brother. As Imam al-Hassan was in his final moments, he would say, "Ya Aba Abdullah atabki alayya." That, "Oh my brother, you cry over me, abki alayk. I am the one who should cry over you, O Hussein. La yawman ka yawmika ya Aba Abdullah. There is no day like your day, O Hussein." This was Medina. Now come towards Karbala. You know, as the day of Ashura is happening, on in Muhammad they go, Qasim he waits. Ali Akbar goes, Qasim he waits. Every time he asks Imam al-Hussein, the Imam says, "Oh Qasim, you are the relic of my brother Qasim. Oh Qasim, take care of your mother. Your mother is a widow, oh Qasim." Appointed comes. Qasim, he goes to his mother. He begins to cry. He says, "Oh mother, my uncle won't let me go." Farwa says, "Oh Qasim, your father left a wasiyah for his brother. Go and take this towards your uncle." The moment Qasim, he takes that letter to Imam al-Hussein, Imam al-Hussein, he begins to cry. Qasim begins to cry. Sayyid ibn Tawus, he says, "Wabakaya hatta ghushiya alayhima." That both of them, they begin to hold each other and cry to such an extent that both of them fell unconscious within that tent. After that, Qasim, he gets up. Hamid ibn Muslim, he narrates that Qasim was so young that the armor would sag off of the body of Qasim. And he says that when I was watching Qasim get upon the horse, I would notice that the shoe of Qasim would be falling off his foot. And Hussein would come and he would place it on the foot of Qasim. And then after that, Qasim, he goes to the battlefield. And as he's going towards the battlefield, he begins to fight. And he fights those to the left, those to the right. But at one point, an individual, he goes towards Qasim and he strikes the head of Qasim. But Qasim didn't fall to the plains of Karbala. The foot of Qasim was stuck upon the saddle of the horse. The horse became startled. The body of Qasim would hit the ground. The body of Qasim would begin to break. Sheikh Jafar Shushtari would say, he would say that why is it when every shaheed was martyred, Qasim was the only one that Imam al-Hussein said, "Kayf al-maut indak?" That how do you find death? You know what reply he gives? He says that on the day of Ashura, every shaheed, their body was trampled after they died. Qasim is that one shaheed. Qasim was alive. The horses were going on the body of Qasim as the body of Qasim would break to pieces. Qasim, he says, "Ya Amma adrikni." My uncle, help me. You know, the Imam, he would say a line at each martyr. When Abbas died, he said, "Alan in kasara dahri," my back has become broken. And when Akbar was shaheed, he said, Ala dunya ba'da khalafa, that made this world become dust. But you know what Imam al-Hussein said at the body of Qasim? He says, Oh Qasim, Azza wallah ala ammek, that how difficult is it for your uncle that you were calling for help. Hussein wasn't able to help you. You know, one more riwayah. Hamid ibn Muslim says, on the plains of Karbala, Hussein picks the body of Qasim. He begins to go towards the tent. Hamid ibn Muslim says, the body of Qasim was so broken that the feet of Qasim would drag across the sand. Hussein comes to the tent. He looks at the body of Ali Akbar. He places Qasim next to Ali Akbar. على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. ماتم حسين.
لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے کیسے شبیر جو قاسم کا جنازہ لائے کیسے شبیر جو قاسم کا جنازہ لائے زخمی تیروں کے ہے زخمی تیروں کے جنازے میں حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم اس گھڑی روئے بہت اس گھڑی روئے بہت شے کو حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا ٹکڑے قاسم کے چنے اور عبا میں ڈالے ٹکڑے قاسم کے چنے اور عبا میں ڈالے باندھ کر لاشا باندھ کر لاشا اٹھایا تو حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم لاشا قاسم آئے قاسم نہ تیرے ٹکڑے بدن کے ہوتے آئے قاسم نہ تیرے ٹکڑے بدن کے ہوتے رو کے سینے سے ہے رو کے سینے سے لگایا تو حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم لاشا قاسم کیسے شبیر جو قاسم کا جنازہ لائے
کیسے شبیر جو قاسم کا جنازہ لائے، زخمی تیروں کے زخمی تیروں کے جنازے میں حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم لاش قاسم آئے قاسم جب گئے زی سے زمیں پر گر کے، آئے قاسم جب گئے زی سے زمیں پر گر کے، آہ بھر کر جو ہے آہ بھر کر جو بلایا تو حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، لاش قاسم اس گھڑی روئے بہت، اس گھڑی روئے بہت، شے کو حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے۔ اللہم صلی علی محمد وعلی
السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي المجتبى، السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، السلام عليكم يا تسة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليك يا مولاي يا صاحب الزمان، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن وكعبة الإيمان، عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله تعالى مخرجه، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.